This program was recorded on March 12, 2023 at the Contemporary Jewish Museum, the CJM, in San Francisco, California, and was organized by the CJM and Reboot Ideas. It was presented in conjunction with the exhibition Jillian Laub, Family Matters at the CJM.
Hello, I'm Sally Martin-Katz. I'm Curatorial Associate of Photography at SF MoMA, and along with our guests today, I am a member of the Reboot Network, and I'm so delighted to invite you to the Kickoff Reboot Ideas Conversation of 2023. Reboot believes that every generation has the opportunity to define Judaism on their own terms, and does that by creating experiences that invite participants to examine who they are and what they have inherited, and what, if anything, do they want to do about it. With the Reboot Ideas series, and specifically today's conversation, our hope is to have a peek into Jillian Laub's process as an artist and to see her journey, how her journey might spark and shape all of us as we reconcile this moment of increasing polarizing politics and rising anti-Semitism. With that, I am pleased to introduce our guests. Maya Benton is the museum curator and art historian based in New York City. From 2008 to 2019, Benton was a curator at the International Center of Photography in New York, where she established a major archive and organized the most widely traveling exhibitions in ICP's history. She has held positions in museums for over 25 years, including at the Getty Museum, the RISD Museum, and the Jewish Museum of Florence, Italy, and Harvard Art Museums. And she has served as curator in residence at several international galleries and cultural institutions. Benton recently organized Southern Rites, an exhibition of Jillian Laub's contemporary images of racial segregation in the American South that is traveling through 2025. Her next book, on Jews and Photography, will be published by Aperture. She is currently spearheading the Jews and Photography Initiative, a collaborative of more than 200 international curators, archivists, interdisciplinary academics, and critics who are interrogating the unique contribution of Jews to the medium of photography, with projects including the establishment of a Jewish vernacular photography archive. Benton is a graduate of Brown University, Harvard University, and the Courtauld Institute of Art in London. Last year, she was a visiting professor at Yale University, where she's currently a visiting fellow, teaching about and researching the intersection of Jews and photography. And I'm delighted to be presenting Jillian, an artist who I believe is making important work right now, and who I consider a friend. From the range of topics she has undertaken, it is clear that Jillian sees the camera as a tool for social change, reconciliation, and even catharsis. From the global to the national to the hyperlocal, Jillian's work embodies the saying, "The personal is political." What I admire in her so much is her firm sense of integrity and her unwillingness to back down from fighting for what she believes in. She approaches her subjects with dignity and empathy, probing beyond the surface and beyond judgment to find their humanity. Jillian is a gifted storyteller, both visually and verbally, as you'll see today, and has an incredible talent for bringing people into her world and making them feel as if they know both her and her subjects personally. While I met both Jillian and Maya long before joining the Reboot community, these are the types of connections that Reboot fosters. So before we get to today's conversation, we want to again express our appreciation for the support of this program from the Jewish Community Federation and Endowment Fund. And we'd like to acknowledge our media sponsors, the Jewish News of Northern California and The Forward. They will talk for about 60 minutes and we'll have a Q&A afterwards. Find out more about Reboot at rebooting.com.
There's no one who knows my work more than Maya Benton, so it's really an honor to sit here with her. And how we organize this is really just taking you through the three bodies of work and just talking about, just presenting you with the bodies of work, and then we're gonna have a conversation about it. So also, let's be as informal, so I want you to interrupt me while I'm showing the work. I'd love for you to—
Don't give me license.
Okay. So I'm going to start with testimony. This image was made in 2002, so it's just quite sad that I'd be sitting here talking about this image when we're in the situation that we're still in. I went to Israel during the second Intifada when there were so many, it was the height of the violence, and what I really wanted to do was make portraits and talk to as many people and really see firsthand how their lives were being affected. So I had this journal, and process is just as important as the actual photograph. So I went around with this journal, and I used to use Polaroid, so I'd always give photographs to the people and have them write in the journal. So this is Eliza at the memorial. I spent a lot of time on this beach because while there was a war going on, I felt like this particular beach in Jaffa was kind of like the personification of like what coexistence could be. So we really saw this, it was so ironic because you'd hear the news of the day and read the paper, but then I'd be at the beach and see this and like pure joy. And it was also where you saw all the walks of life. And I really wanted to capture how diverse Israel was. And there were actually lots of Arab families playing with Jewish children. And it was just, it was beautiful. So I spent a lot of time there. And part of the testimonies, the photograph is just one layer because you see these women and they look so happy to be at the beach. And then they'd write in the journal, and sometimes there's like, I think 5 to 6 different languages in the journal. So oftentimes they didn't know what they said, and the exciting part was like getting back to a translator and having them tell me like what they write. And the thing, one of the sisters, there are 3 sisters, and one of the sisters wrote in Arabic how she was so excited to bring her children. This is their happy place, but their husbands can't come because they work in Nablus. Even though they have Israeli IDs, it takes them hours to cross a checkpoint that would take them 10 minutes to get home. So you really got to understand the conflict in a nuanced way without kind of hitting you over the head, and that was really what I wanted to do. This is one of the pages. And this is the beach, again, where you have literally Jewish and Arab families playing. But I was also interested in all of the Arab Israelis that lived within Israel proper. So this is Madeline in her bedroom. And I loved it because she talked about her Jewish best friends. And then you get the politics in what she says, because she says she's turned 18 and her best friends are going to the military, but because she's Muslim, she's an Arab Israeli, she can't join the military. So it was, to me, this was like, I was learning about the conflict and this place through the work that I was doing. And I love the journals, like the tactile. I cherish these journals. And they're my favorite. So I went to their school. I kind of just went everywhere. I talked to everyone that I possibly could talk to. I saw different events that were going on, and I'd show up. And it was kind of like I was on a road trip throughout the country. So I went to this school in Jaffa, and I spotted these twins. I asked the teacher, where are their parents? I'd love to get permission to photograph them. So we go back to the home. We're drinking tons of tea, and they disappeared. They were in, these very conservative uniforms at school. They disappear and come out, and they're dressed like this and posing. And I was like, and for me, portraiture is really, truly a collaboration. Like, I want to photograph people the way that they want to present themselves. So they pose like this, and I was like, oh, wow, where did you learn how to pose like this? And they said, oh, our Jewish babysitter. But their Jewish babysitter could no longer come there and work there because of the conflict. So it was in stories like that that really, really gave me a window into the nuance and not, the headlines that we see in the papers. And this was a real turning point for me because I was trying to not address the conflict visually, and then there was a suicide bombing, and I knew that I had to because it was it was irresponsible not to. So this is when I met Kinneret. Now, I met Kinneret in the hospital. I never took pictures of her there because I almost didn't know how to handle it because it almost felt disrespectful. So I met her family, and I was just so incredibly moved by them and her. And she just said to me, you know, I'm lucky to be alive. And I was like, there is so much to learn from this human being right now. It was kind of like one of those moments of awe where you're just like, I don't even know how to process this. So I went back home, I kept in touch with her and her family, I got a grant, and I went back, and this is, you'll see, this is a photograph that I made of her, but I really didn't like the photograph, but I loved what she wrote, and I'm gonna read you her testimony. At the age of 23, I was a student of reflexology and a bartender on Allenby Street. Now at the age of 25, I'm a victim of terror fighting for my independence with many years of rehabilitation to come. I am burned on 70% of my body. I am a girl who likes to laugh and have fun, but this girl is actually not a girl anymore. I'm a woman who is newly aware of her own power. This power exists in all of us if you are put to the test. I am as happy as I have ever been in my life. I won the knowledge to discover exactly what I'm worth, to understand that although there is much suffering in the world, there is also much happiness and joy. I feel blessed to experience both deeply. Like my best friend in her wheelchair says, there is an angel in every one of us, and we, the crippled, are the ones who learn this. So I spent a lot of time with Kinneret. I moved in with her, actually. She let me during the summer, and this picture was made at like 3 or 4 in the morning because her whole community adapted to her life, which was she couldn't be exposed to the sun at all. So we would sleep during the day, and everyone came alive at night. And this was the picture that I really felt told the story of Kinneret. Now this is Haitem and his brother. Kinneret, and so Haitem was in the first suicide bombing, first female suicide bombing. And it's a really complicated story because he's Arab-Israeli, and his parents found out about his relationship to a Jewish woman when they were both in the hospital together recovering from the bomb. And it was, you know, my hope is that the pictures are just a starting point, and we can really, they're used to have conversations. So one of the best, I don't know if you were there at Aperture, one of the most moving, incredible nights, Aperture for the programming of testimony flew in Haitem and Kinneret. They never would have had that moment to speak, and just to encapsulate like how complicated the situation was, he felt more comfortable speaking in Arabic. So we hired somebody from the UN we just wanted somebody who could translate. Did not know it was going to be a Palestinian woman. And so we're having this conversation, and she's, you know, he's saying how he felt conflicted being an Arab-Israeli, and he actually said in Arabic, I feel a little disappointed by my community. I felt taken care of by the Israelis more. And the translator, who was just there to translate, said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to repeat that. I will not repeat that. And it was like we were seeing in real time the conflict playing out. So anyway, it was one of those, unfortunately it was never filmed, but it was one of those moments where it's just like, oh, this is what it's all about. And, you know, then Kinneret and Haitem, you know, became friends from there. It's just, yeah, okay. It was really important for me. I went to the New York Times Magazine because I knew I wanted to photograph in Gaza and the West Bank civilians who were also affected by the Second Intifada. And I couldn't do that without getting the backing of a publication so they can help me find a translator and with the permits. And so they commissioned me to spend time in the West Bank and Gaza, and I researched families who were also affected that were civilians and not part of the conflict. And this is Samar and Rawan. On Thursday, July 19th, 2001, we were returning home from a relative's wedding, happy after a great night. We were taken by surprise by a Jewish settler's car. They opened fire at us. I didn't see anything but a flash, and then I felt warm over my entire body. I woke up in the hospital. They told me 3 were killed in the car, and my daughter Amira was injured. Rawan was fine, but she almost bled to death. I was shot by 4 bullets in the back, shoulders, pelvis, and colon. Thanks to God, we are still alive. I'm lucky, but I'm thinking now about my daughter's future. How is she going to live with a deformity? I try to give my children a normal life. I do not want to teach them to hate. I do not want my children to hate Jews. We used to live well without any trouble with anyone, but then the disasters came to us. So it was kind of amazing as when I was with her, she was flipping through and just sat there fascinated, and just all she wanted to do was read everyone in Israel's testimony. And then when I went back to Kinneret, so I felt like this kind of intermediary where I was trying to, I don't know, it felt like she, you know, Kinneret said, I'll never forget this, Kinneret said on her bed, she said, somebody must have been in this so much pain to do this to me. And there was so much empathy there. So this is Ayal. He was on a bus, and it was actually his birthday that day. He thought he was kidnapped, and his family was teaching him how to communicate with little plastic letters that kids learn to read with. This is Guy and Renate. I love this story. She told me that she'd always been in love with him, and when she found out he got injured and he was in the hospital, she came and took care of him, and they've been together ever since. And this is Murad, an Israeli soldier, shot his foot and his knee. And this is Michal. She was walking home from school and lost her friend and her legs by a car bomb. And this is Asil and Ola. I was actually photographing their brother who was injured, and then I turn around and I look at them, and they're just like peeking over, looking, watching the whole shoot. And then I asked them a couple of questions, and in the journal I asked them, what is your biggest wish? And they said their biggest wish and dream was to go to Jerusalem, which was amazing because Jerusalem's like a mile away from their home. So this all culminated into the book Testimony. And as Maya knows, I'm never finished with anything. I have a really hard time finishing something because I just want it to last forever. So this did finish, but I still, my care and passion for the place and really trying to understand a place and people continues. So I continued to photograph in Israel, and there's just there's one project that I think is important to show because I met this young girl on one of my trips, and I was doing a story on the Hilltop Youth, and she looked like a hippie and like kind of like a hipster, cool, beautiful young teenager. And she spoke English like an American, and they're living in Palestinian territory. They're living over the Green Line, and bless you. And she was wearing a Meir Kahane t-shirt. And I asked her why she's wearing a Meir Kahane. She said her father's best friends with Meir Kahane. So anyway, to make a long story short, I was really, really fascinated how these young kids were like, fighting this war that I didn't understand where their like blind faith came from. And so I researched, they all went to this school called in Ma'ale Levana. And the slogan was, we'll teach your settler girls to be real men. And I also realized that all of their parents were actually American or British, and these young children were born here, and this is what they knew. And before I photographed them, their teacher was killed in the middle of the night with 3 of her kids. So it was it's the most complicated, tough story I think I've ever done. And I went there with my friend and the great writer Elizabeth Rubin, and we would just go home and be like, it's hard to wrap our heads around this. So anyway, these are the photographs that I made. This is Beital, and she lives alone in this hilltop, and they knocked down, the Israeli police knocked down these houses that they rebuild every day because this is their land. And I was just so struck, by but just how they were so focused on fighting for their land, but they didn't know any different because this is how they were born. They were born into this. Do you want to say something, Maya?
Well, you know, I really want you to hear from Jillian about her work because it's such a gift to be able to hear her talk about it. But I think once she's finished, we'll talk about broader themes that tie all of her major bodies of work together. And for me, one of the things that's so interesting about the kind of warrior girls on the hilltop is that it's a thread in all of Jillian's work where she's often photographing people in these moments of tension and transition where they're questioning these inherited narratives of who they've been told that they are and who they've been told they should be it segregationists in the American South or Palestinians and Israelis or these warrior girls on the hilltop or, you know, Republican family, which we'll get to. You know, these inherited scripts of who we are and how hard it is to define a new version of yourself and your own identity. And in so much of Jillian's work, I think she's drawn to telling the stories of people in these profound moments of interrogating these inherited narratives and scripts and kind of these moments of tension when they're trying to redefine who they are and will they take on the scripts and stories they've been told. And that has a lot to do also with her own family work that's on view here, or are they going to resist that and build something new? And the profound bravery that it takes to kind of reject those inherited narratives. So I love these warrior girls on the hilltops because they play into, you know, when you look at Jillian's broad bodies of work, I am always interested in finding the through lines. And I think that part of the reason, and we'll get into this in the discussion period, that she's so gifted at this is that she really comes to it from a place of complete openness, no judgment. And that allows her to listen to people in this inner kind of existential conflict about who they want to be. And you can't really do that if you're judging the inherited narratives they've been receiving. And so it's, you know, she said that she never finishes a project. I don't think that's true. I think it's that for her, relationships are always evolving and people have stories to tell that change as they age and their perspectives change. And so to be able to hold on to those stories as they shift, as we all change over time, she's able to kind of capture and then hold a mirror up to ourselves of, you know, who we are and how much of that is what we've inherited and how much of it is what we've decided that we want to be. And I see that in so much of her work.
So part of their like social capital too, I was just fascinated by is like how many times they've all been arrested and how many times they went to jail for their country. So this is something, if I didn't have little kids at home, this is really something, there's so many things that, you know, you make decisions but for your family, but this is something that I think is such an important story. Elizabeth and I were saying, God, can we just spend, you know, we want to spend a month filming their neighbors, the Arab neighbors who are just the same age. So when I say I'm never finished, it's like, I always feel like there's so much more to do, so. This is, we're gonna go to Southern Rites, which is the project that Maya has curated. And it starts also in 2002, and I actually made this picture right before I went to Israel. Because this is Julie, and I freelance a lot for different publications. At the time, Spin Magazine had received, who I worked for, received a letter from Julie's sister, Anna, saying that, please, it was really a cry for help. She wrote to the editor, please come to my town and tell the story of my town. I'm boycotting my prom because my boyfriend is black and I'm white and I can't take him to my prom. So the editor called me and said, we have to do this story. And the prom had since passed, Anna graduated, but the next segregated event was homecoming. So Anna connected us with her sister, met us there, and they were kind of our chaperones. And this is Julie and Bubba, who also couldn't go to prom together. And this was, I don't love this photograph, it's not a great photograph, but it's an important photograph to me because it just shows you how people, there was a ballot and everyone had to vote white and black queen. And these are the representatives, a white representative and black representative for freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And they were organized in that way when they announced the queens. So if you haven't gotten the idea that I get a little obsessive, So I had already, really, I was on a mission to really work in and figure out this complicated situation in the Middle East. But I was really haunted by this town, and I said, when I finish with this project, I'm coming back to Georgia, because it's like I don't have to travel very far. This is going on in my own backyard, really. So I called up the school in 2008, and I asked, when is your prom? And they said, which one? This is 2008. And I said, which one? Both, either. And she said, oh, the white folks' prom is this Friday. The black folks' prom is in a few weeks. So I went straight down, and this is one of the first pictures that I made in 2008. And this is Shelby on her grandmother's car. Yes, do you want to say something?
Well, and that's what I mean about kind of inherited narratives and scripts, which I think also ties into her family photographs. When you look at the image of Shelby or Harley, they're talking about the traditions that they've inherited, and as a kind of justification for their worldview. And she's often, the testimony is so crucial, and their own storytelling is so crucial in how those images are digested. And it's also Jillian's kind of patience and genuine interest in people's stories that allows not only for the image, but also the context. And she'll read a few of the quotes from this story. I think that in hearing people talk about, well, this is what my parents told me is right, you have to step away from the judgment when you immediately see this image. And so I think there are these through lines to be thoughtful of as she talks about the different bodies of work.
So this is Harley, and I met her, and she was the organizing the white prom in 2008. She said I could photograph her and follow her getting ready, but she didn't want to talk about race. So I photographed her in the salon, and then somebody had recognized me from the homecoming, and I quickly got chased out of town. My tires were slashed, and it was a big disappointment because I had pitched it to the New York Times Magazine, and then it was so embarrassing when I had to be like, well, I got chased out of town.
And you were threatened by...
Yeah, they said the NRA, people, take the law into their own hands here. The sheriff came to my table. It was not pretty, but so I did leave because I was scared. But some of the girls that I had met who were going to the black prom next week, I promised I'd come back and photograph them. So this is at the black prom the next week, and I think I'm going to read you Lacey's quotes. She says...
Well, can I talk about the two dates?
Oh, yes. Okay.
One of the things that was important to us when we were telling the story of Southern Rites was, obviously we're both white presenting, and we were telling the stories of black adolescents and young adults grappling with this legacy of segregation and racially motivated violence. And it was so important that they tell their story in their own words. So when you have the images, you also have the text is the quotes from the students, both at the time that Jillian took the photograph, and then when we were organizing the exhibition, we went back and we got later quotes from them. So there are quotes from them when they're 16 or 17 years old, and then again when they're in their mid-20s. And so there is this kind of Rashomon, like each person has a very different take. Is it 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or 2 steps forward and 2 steps back, and that kind of constant interrogation of, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice, and does it? And I think it was so important to have them tell the story in their own words. So in the cases, we had, we talked about Plessy and Brown versus Board of Ed, and that's where I got into the kind of curatorial history. But it was really important that on the walls that they were telling their stories, not only in their own voices as adolescents, but also as young adults when they were reflecting on the change that they had brought to the town and what they saw coming in the future. And so she's reading quotes both, and she'll give you the context.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is Lacey, the Black Prom Queen, in 2008. The first time I paid attention to politics was when Obama was running. I remember being in social studies class, and the teacher was saying it was ridiculous that he was running because he was Muslim and not from here. It felt really wrong, and I wanted to say something because I thought it was just racism and hostility. But since everyone was white except one other student, I didn't feel comfortable enough to speak up. I remember both of us looking at each other in disbelief, hoping the other would say something, but neither of us did. And then in 2016, Lacey says, I was always inspired by Nelson Mandela and his belief that education was everything. I knew it was important to leave Montgomery County after graduation and be exposed to the larger world. I went to Spelman College in Atlanta and then law school at Emory. I still go back home every month. It's where my whole family is, and I want to be a good role model for my nieces and nephews. I want to help keep their eyes open. I didn't have that when I was growing up. For example, I was just so excited to finally get to go to prom that I didn't want to fight an uphill battle to integrate it. That would have ruined my senior year. A lot of people have to fight for survival and fight through poverty, so fighting for racism here is not at the top of their list. When you're in the day-to-day battle of poverty and making ends meet, that trumps the racial issues, even though at the end of the day, they're all connected.
One of the things that's so interesting in looking at the quotes from the students who are then young adults when we went back to interview them is, you know, some are saying it's getting better, some are saying it's getting worse, some say it's always been shitty, it's always going to be shitty. And I think that one of the strengths, again, in kind of bridging all of Jillian's bodies of work is that she lives in this gray area. You know, for those of you who haven't seen the HBO Southern Rites film, you know, you see this story of, and we'll discuss this in her work, but you see this really complicated story, and then you make judgments about who's the bad actor and who's good and who's bad, and then all of a sudden it gets turned around and you question all of those presumptions. And I think that Jillian really, and also with her own family's narrative, lives in the gray, and it's a much more realistic way to listen to and tell people's stories, and it's harder work, and I think it's one of the great strengths of her work.
Okay. So then I returned back to the town a few times without my camera during the winter because the white prom was going to happen in 2009, and I was going to go back and try and photograph it. But before, I really wanted to talk to the families and tell them, yes, this is about race. Please help me understand why this is still going on. Talk to me. I want to hear your point of view. So this is Harley, whose parents were interviewed by me, and she was open to talking. And this is before the white prom that was held on a Friday at the Vidalia Community Center, and the black prom, all the same graduating class, was held at the same place the next night on Saturday.
And these are classes of like 50 kids who are half black and half white, and they've been together since kindergarten, but they can't dance together, they can't celebrate together. White kids can go to black prom, but black kids can't go to the white prom, and interracial couples are not allowed to dance and celebrate together or buy tickets to go to the prom together.
Yeah. So this is in Dominique's hair salon. This is Kiki and Kira, who are getting ready for the prom, and I'm going to be there next week because Dominique's prom is next week, and Dominique's granddaughter is going to the prom. So this is Angel in the parking lot of the black prom. And I think it's important to tell the story of the, you know, when I was there photographing, I did not see, there were no Asian people, and there was a large Mexican community, and people didn't know what to do with them. Really, they said, oh, well, you can go to both proms. So,
and you also had to kind of vote the black queen and the white queen, and they told little kids, you crown the black queen, you crown the white queen, and so the growing Mexican immigrant community didn't fit along these well-worn racial lines.
But there was a Mexican little girl who was considered the white first grader who gave the white crown.
And in some places they were considered white, and other towns considered black, and some they could go to both.
Correct.
But there was also, when we started organizing the exhibition, a lot of those the kids, Mexican-American kids' parents didn't have legal status, and so they were not comfortable being photographed and giving testimony. And so we told their story through the way that their classmates were talking about their experiences as a kind of workaround. And that was, we were organizing this exhibition right after Trump's first election. And so with his anti-immigration and anti-Mexican narratives, rhetoric, we wanted to insert this story more centrally into Southern Rites, because I think it's an important piece.
Yeah. This is Lacey's younger sister, Naisha, and she was the prom queen. And she's dancing with the prom king, Kyrie. Felicia, outside of the black prom. And this was, because the New York Times has a lot of reach, it caused, sorry for lack of a better word, a shitstorm. And they were forced to...
The story went completely viral. And
they were forced to integrate the proms. So I was definitely not welcome back. But I did.
And you were physically attacked by the sheriff.
Correct, but that wasn't until 2011.
Right, but
So I spent that next year. First of all, I knew that photographs, they can do something. I believe in the power of photographs telling stories, but I felt frustrated by the medium because if you didn't know anything in this context, you see really beautiful, fun pictures of teenagers. So you don't know the context, and speaking to everyone and hearing testimonies and the voices, I was like, this needs to be a film. It needs to be a film. I had no idea how to make a film. And I didn't have any aspirations to make a film. So an SLR camera is very easy to figure out. I mean, it made it easier to figure out how to actually translate still photography into moving image. So I took a crash course that winter in filmmaking, and I went back and I knew I had to start filming. So I went in front of boards and the Board of Ed, the parents, they all voted if I could attend the 2010 prom. They all voted yes. So this was the one picture I took before I then got escorted off. The powers that be did not agree with the vote and didn't care, so I was escorted off. But this is a video.
I got in a lot of trouble with some of the students for trying to integrate it. They told me, what are you doing? It's not the parents, it is us. We don't want it together, and you need to stop trying to do this. I got cussed out. I talked to my boyfriend and I said, let's just go to both. But when I went to buy the tickets to the white prom, I was not allowed. I was told that if my date was gonna be black, he wouldn't be let in. So we just went to the black prom.
I feel like the rest of the world will look at this like, what in the hell? They go to school together, they play basketball together, they cheerlead together, they're best friends. You know, it's happening everywhere. Why can't it happen in a small town like this?
This community and this school system is fine like it is. We don't want to change it. We want to live the way our grandparents lived and the way our great-grandparents lived. Why change something that has worked? Just leave it alone.
And then even with the little kids, in elementary school, they pick black elementary girl and a white elementary girl. They even make the little kids be segregated. It's so sad. I didn't even notice it. The little kids don't even know, but they're making them, you know, learn that you are black, you are white. It's sad. I didn't even notice that.
Until just now?
Yeah, I guess I didn't recognize it till now that they are actually teaching kids to be, you know, segregated, to be black, be white. No, be a color instead of a person. Be your color, act your color. Know your place.
My grandma told me red birds and bluebirds don't nest together. He come out with a red head and a blue ass. I mean, I just don't feel like it's right. That's what my grandma told me, and I believe she was right.
I also knew that the proms were a symptom of a much, much, much larger story. So I kept going back and really, this is 2011. I was actually, from 2011 on, allowed to go to the prom. So it was like, you know, like Naisha said, we take one step forward and 2 steps back. So while I was at the integrated proms, something actually, at the same time that I was there was a racially charged murder. And one of the families who had fought for me to go to the prom, their son, who I had photographed, was killed by an older white man. And so it's just how everything is connected. So this is Naisha, who I photographed at prom queen, and she was saying how she was so happy that the proms were integrated, but her best friend, Justin, was killed. And the person that killed him was walking free. So these are just kind of images around town to kind of tell the story and give it context. And this is titled Public Shaming. So instead of doing jail time, they chose to walk up and down the street with these signs all day long.
And one of them was just peeing outside of a bar that had closed, and he had to lose his job because he was forced to kind of walk up and down the street for weeks wearing this sign.
So this is Siobhan, who I photographed a bunch of times at his prom, and he's holding a picture of he and his brother Justin, who was killed with him. So the project really took a turn because, you know, racially segregated proms just seem not. I mean, it tells the story of this context of a town that is just steeped in racism, and then we have a racially charged murder, and the systems were, I mean, they thought it was actually progress that the man who killed Justin was going to trial.
And it was this sense of a kind of jubilation that finally there was integration and progress was there, and then there was this murder of a young unarmed black man in the town, and then the ensuing trial, and so it was this constant kind of interrogation of, is there progress? Or are we kind of staying in the same place? And so when we organized the exhibition, it was the story of the segregation, and then the integration, and then the murder, and also photographs of Justin and ephemera from his life, and we made a video piece, the 911 call about his murder, but it was also photographs of the town. And then Jillian took a photograph of the cotton fields in the town, which is obviously a very charged image, and we took the history, the racial history of the town, so from slavery and NAACP, lynchings, voting rights, through the segregation, the Brown versus Board of Education, segregated schools, the integrated schools, then the segregated proms, the integrated proms, and then the murder, and we'd kind of done this whole history of the town, and also the racist laws in Georgia, which are there throughout, and then we kind of closed the timeline. And shortly after we kind of sent it to be printed, a young man who was on the soccer team, a young black student, found a hangman's noose suspended over the goalposts. And he went to report that to the school.
In the backyard of the school during PE.
And he'd posted, like, this is the shit that goes on at my school. And then he went to report it, and he was suspended from the school for misuse of technology. And we realized we had to kind of open the timeline back up. And so this exhibition, as it travels, we're actually updating the text. So we have Stacey Abrams' historic run, and then we had, Georgia became the center of national conversations about voting rights and the curtailment of black participation in voting process and anti-democratic trends. And so Georgia became, who could have imagined, also the election of the first black and first Jewish senators from Georgia. And so that as we travel the show, the timeline keeps getting added to, and also it becomes a conversation about Georgia and the nation's struggle with democracy and voting rights.
Yeah.
And violence against black bodies, of course.
This is a video piece in the show, and we thought it was important to share because it just says so much. And it's the 911 call that Norman made, who killed Justin, right after he killed Justin.
I need a deputy to come out to my house, please.
What's wrong?
I had a little trouble out here a while ago.
With who? Is this Mr. Neesmith?
Yeah.
You and your daughter?
No.
No?
A friend of hers that was over here.
Okay.
Danielle's okay.
All right. Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah. But I need a deputy to come out here, because I think I hurt one of them.
What do you do, Mr. Norman?
I hate to say it, but I shot him.
You think you shot him?
Yeah.
You don't know who it was, Mr. Norman?
It was just a black boy.
It was a black boy?
Yeah.
Is he still there?
No, he hit the woods.
He hit the woods?
Yeah.
Just talk to me, Mr. Norman, okay?
Oh, yeah.
Did you shoot him in the residence or outside the residence?
In the house.
In the house? Do you need an ambulance, Mr. Norman?
No, I'm just all scraped up,
Okay. What kind of gun did you shoot him with?
22.
A 22?
Yeah.
22 pistol, right?
Yeah.
Shot him with a 22 pistol.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let you know when. Yeah, blackmail. Do you know what he had on, Mr. Norman?
I think it's some kind of dark jacket, what he finally put on it. I got his hat. He left his hat in the yard when he went out the door.
A dark jacket?
No baggy breeches, the way they...
And baggy breeches.
The way they go.
Okay, Mr. Norman, listen to me. I want you to walk away from the gun, okay? Because the deputy's there. I want you to go meet him at the door, okay?
Oh, I will.
Do you know his name?
Nah, it's a black boy.
It was a black boy.
Well, I had a little trouble a while ago.
Do you know what he had on, Mr. Norman?
I think I heard one of them, yes.
What do you do, Mr. Norman?
Baggy breeches.
In baggy breeches.
I hate to say it, but I shot him the way they go. Just a black boy. A friend of hers that was over here.
Did you shoot him in the residence or outside the residence? You don't know who it was, Mr. You think you shot him?
Just a black boy.
How do I explain that to my 19-year-old son? You know, I can't tell him that it's okay to shoot somebody.
So, just like everything, it is, there's a lot of gray area. So it was really important for me also, the film was meant to be finished, and I really didn't feel right finishing this film without interviewing Norman. So I waited till he got out of the detention center, and I went and spent a few days with him after he was released. And I think it's complicated. It's really complicated, and I'm not going to speak more about it than just to say that, you know, the context in which he was born and the systems that were put in place for him led him to have all of these. He was programmed in a way himself, or a victim of his circumstance in a way. Would you agree?
Well, I encourage all of you to see the HBO film because it's just brilliant. But there's a moment where you watch him and you're like, this is this white racist, and then you realize he had a niece who got pregnant and had a mixed race daughter, Danielle, who's half black, and Danielle was left on Norman's doorstep, and he raised her as his own. So he raised this black child as his own child. And I think that's, again, you know, Jillian's storytelling is not easy. You know, no one is just the villain or is just the righteous one, and that's what life is like. And I think that's a great kind of segue into her family story, because it's so complex, and even more complex when it's your own family. And it would be so easy to go and make someone who we already have these kind of preconceptions about look shitty or kind of recapitulate what we've already heard about them. And instead, Jillian really goes into it wanting to understand where people are coming from. And it's the only way to really tell stories that heal and make us understand the bigger tensions that we're all living with. And I think that's a great kind of segue into the next body of work.
So Maya wanted me to kind of break up the stories with some commission work, which I do a lot of. So these are just a few images of commission work. This is Dolly. I photographed her the week before I was getting married, and I said, what is the key to a successful long marriage? Because she'd been married for decades. And she was like, travel a lot and not together. So my husband is not here. The Obamas, Ivanka with her dog, and Maya really wanted me to include this. She wanted me to show how photos are used in lots of different ways. So
this is Jillian's photograph of Trump that she'd taken well before he had any eyes to the presidency, and so I said that would make a great dartboard, and so she gifted me this dartboard. I have the only one. And I actually hung it under Jenny Holter's Abuse of Power Comes as No Surprise, so that's an installation in my kitchen.
I spent a week at Paris Island with these basically these young kids to me had been, they were born after 9/11, so it's like, it was a story about the America's Forever War, because to them, they had been in war since they were born. And I photographed Sharon a bunch of times, and we don't have time for the stories, but there's some really good stories with Sharon.
Well, and I thought it was important that in her more than 2-decade-long career, that she had these 10-year-long projects in the case of Southern Rites, Testimony work took many, many years, and then of course Family Matters is a 20-year project, but there's also a lot of commission work that you're probably familiar with. You don't even know is Jillian's work, but you've seen everywhere. And so I wanted you to see not only those images, but also kind of how they are circulated and the kind of evolving reception and dissemination of those images, which is part of her practice.
This was a story for Time. And it was a portfolio on transgender Americans. And that's Laverne Cox. This was a more recent story that I loved, and you know, I love photographing families, so I really wanted to photograph the James family in their living room, and I wanted, the inspiration of the photograph was this family portrait that they chose to buy and hang in their dining room.
And this is LeBron James, because I wouldn't have known, so for anyone else.
I think you're the only person who didn't know who LeBron James was. She's like, who?
I'm not alone. I'm not.
Okay.
Someone out here is with me.
And this is, you know, I'm just happy to take pictures any way I can. So I don't turn, you know, the fashion world is like a whole world, but I actually look at fashion as like a way to really make pictures I want to make. So it was really important for me. I saw in the Instagram, I'm just saying how I think and so in the Instagram I saw them once wearing matching bathing suits. So I was like to the stylist, okay, I know we have to have next season, but find matching bathing suits. So we had them in matching bathing suits. Mary J. Blige.
And there is also a through line in this work with, you know, self-presentation and what the role is of how you tell the story of someone else and how they tell their own story, both in testimony and in terms of that kind of dialectic relationship with the photographer. So I think one of Jillian's great strengths is, you know, all the clues about someone's life and story. You saw with the Palestinian woman, the different pillows and the different stories that were hung around the room. There's always like a whole biography, even in the room and the background to what she's photographing. And so there is a relationship and a kind of dialectical collaboration in the way that there is a self-presentation and how much of someone and how they want to tell their own story, which I think Jillian is very sensitive to people being able to tell their own stories, both in terms of testimony, but also visually.
So yeah, it's not easy these days with publicists and everything to take portraits of people in their home, and that's like that's what I do. So the navigating how to try and get a studio, to move from a studio to her home was about 3 weeks of trying to negotiate. But anyway, that's Amy Schumer in her house. So now we are at Family Matters. And this is my grandpa Irving on the beach in 2003 when we were celebrating his 85th birthday.
And this was my wedding present from Jillian, is this print. Actually. So it hangs in our kitchen. It reminds me every day to enjoy life.
I've been photographing my family for over 20 years, and it didn't start out as like a project. Clearly I have a lot of characters in my family, and they were willing participants. My grandparents really is who I started photographing because they were like my first muses, and I was kind of in love with their love story. But you know, photographs were also such a big deal and such a big part of my life. So these are, the end papers of my book are just all the vernacular photographs from my family. And it's like I wanted to recreate my own family album. And this is my grandfather and his vegetable garden. This is in 1999. This is Grandma grabbing Grandpa's tushy. Tea time. And this is my grandparents and my aunt and uncle. And this is actually a recreated snapshot. I started consciously photographing my family when I had this moment. I was a student at ICP studying photography, and I think we had a 4-hour critique class, and in the middle of the critique class, we'd all go out for cigarette breaks. And I was next to this Scandinavian guy who I was friends with, Christian Nordstrom, and he was like, oh my God, look at, because this is when ICP was on the Upper East Side. And he was like, why do those women have to dress like that with their fur coats? It's so disgusting, the capitalism in New York and America. And I was like, yeah, it's terrible. And then the next thing I know, as they're approaching, and I'm sweating as I'm realizing that I actually know these people. And I hear, Jillian, oh my God, what are you doing here? So that started the overt existential crisis that, and maybe it hasn't ended. But so anyway, I really did. Then it became the topic of conversation, like, oh, you have to start photographing your family. And I did love the work of Larry Sultan. I loved family photos, but I was scared to do that with my family. So I did it, but it was also a really fun, it was a way to navigate and to be closer to my family. So I spent so many years it was just me with my camera photographing and really admiring all the rituals and joy. And I was just I always felt like an outsider looking in, but I was also an insider. So it was navigating this relationship. And as you can see, photographs are really important and used in so many different ways. This is my grandparents' bedside table, and they went to Santa Fe and went to a studio and dressed up like this and made all of these different cutouts and came back and gave them to the entire family. And this is my mom's table, our kitchen table. So you can see that's my bat mitzvah cutout. And it was so sweet. When people came over, she would put them in the front. Like whoever was coming over, she wanted them to feel most important, so she would move them to the front of the line. This is Jamie practicing for the family. And again, another example of like how I've kind of walked the fine line of my own personal work and commission work. In the beginning of working, I was asked to do a lot of fashion commissions, and one was they asked each artist to make one picture of what home meant to them. So I had just a few weeks before been at my Uncle Marvin's Shiva in this room, and everyone was fawning over Jamie's dancing. So I kind of had this picture in my head of like, I want Jamie practicing for the family. So this was a picture that I made. Everyone was styled. But to me, the picture does transcend the magazine, the fashion story. At least I hope it does. I photographed every occasion. Thanksgiving, there wasn't one except for the year after my grandfather died that I didn't photograph or film. My mom's table. That's my mom and my dad on the right. And although Thanksgiving kind of expanded with the expanding families, we moved to my sister's house, but what remained constant were these aprons that were ever changing. They loved these aprons. Father's Day, Jason and Farah. And I thought that the only way that I could get through planning a wedding is by photographing it. So my parents hired Harriet, the wedding planner, that nobody messed with. So that's at a tasting. Aunt Lee. And I really was, it became, as the years went on, really about the cycle of life and aging and birth, death. And this was my grandmother. When she turned 90, we all came to pick her up, to take her out to lunch. It was, we had a tradition that all the women in the family took my grandma out to lunch on her birthday. And I was picking her up this day, and I went to get her, and she was asleep in the bathroom. Grandma getting a massage. And then my children started being born, and I photographed my grandparents, my grandmother with my daughters, and my parents with my daughters. And then in 2016, everything changed, and another existential crisis. My whole family became like really, really, really passionate Trump supporters. So this is my mom in her living room. And again, the camera, thank God for it, because it's really my way of, it's my form of therapy. So I'm able to process things and, you know, maybe hide behind the camera sometimes, because it's like I can study something without being a part of it in a way. And I didn't show this picture for a very, like, I think I remember sending it to you and be like, do not show this to a single person. So it was kind of traumatic, but that's also like the fascinating thing about photography, and like what we're so in love with too, is like everyone looks at a picture and sees something else. Like my mom loves this picture, and she loves it, and my cousin sees it and feels sick. So it's just it's like a Rorschach test, really. So that's my dad. Thanksgiving. And, you know, look, humor is something that has saved me. So there is an element of humor, but it's not making fun. I don't want it to get, but they're hysterical at the same time. So there's always like something ironic to me, or just maybe awe, like, is this really happening? You know?
But there was a time when there was no humor, and it was deeply, deeply painful.
Oh yeah. I talked to people last night, and I said, I speak about it and smile right now because I really, truly feel like I worked so much out. There was so much darkness and so much pain, but again, I think this whole doing this really helped me process what this was and what it meant and what it means and how to deal with it, truly. So that was my table setting that my sister did think was hysterical.
She was like trolled by her family that they set this up for her.
You wanted me to include the text messages, but I didn't. But there is in the exhibition, there's one of the things that is my favorite thing, because it really does get into the nuance of the conflict and relationships and families. I mean, we all are on family group texts, friend group texts, and the way people communicate with each other over text can be really, really, really toxic and really painful. But people act in ways that they don't, you wouldn't say these things to a person, but that's where a lot of our communication was happening throughout this time. And I thought it was really important to include that because it was so much part of the story. Yeah, so if you have the time and you haven't seen, I would go up and just read the scrolling group texts. This is my nephew's bedroom. I also really, really, never want to present something that somebody's not comfortable with. So initially I took a portrait of him in his bedroom, and he was fine with it. And as he got older, he was under 18 here. As he got older, and when the book was coming out, I showed them every picture that was going into the book, and he said, I don't want that picture going in the book. I do not want my face. He understood the implications of what that would mean for him. And it killed me because I think it's a really strong picture and it says a lot. And I really was sick about it and lost so much sleep, but I knew I couldn't. So we came up with a compromise, and I was allowed to show his bedroom without his name, just my nephew's bedroom. And this is a really important picture, although this was made in 2007 or 2007. This is my nephew Slater's bris. I think it was a really important moment for me. Well, first of all, the two nephews of my sisters the circumcisions were done in synagogues. And all of a sudden, it's not in the synagogue anymore, it's at Trump Country Club. So when I made that, but this is this is 2007. So when I was making this picture, it's so funny because I remember there were water bottles because Trump has his face on every water bottle. And I was like, everyone was drinking the water bottles. I was like, get the water bottles out of the picture. Like I didn't want any Trump water bottle in the picture. But again, text and context is always very, very important for my work. So I just want to read this. Oh, are we going over? Okay, I'll wrap it up. But this is a pretty important moment. Okay, my sister Allie has 3 sons, each of whom had a circumcision with a party afterwards. I, the proud aunt, photographed every one of them. I would stand close with my camera while my father held the baby and the rabbi held the knife. My sister would be on the other side of the room crying. My 2 oldest nephews had their bris ceremonies at synagogues, but the youngest was held at the Trump National Golf Club in Westchester. For decades, my father wanted to join one of the storied Chappaqua clubs near our house, but at the time, Jews and black people were decidedly not welcome. When the Trump Club opened without restrictions, my father joined right away and became a proud, long-standing member. The only requirement was having enough money to join. So that was a real turning point because I was like, oh, Trump accepted my dad when he was rejected. This is so much deeper. This is emotional. Like, this is an identity that so again, I started to really unpack it and think about, like, how did we get to where we are now? And that is my father. I told him I really wanted to make a portrait of him playing golf. That's at my sister's house. I brought my girls up to see her, and that's her son wearing. This is one of my favorite images, actually. This is my mom in Shavasana. She's wearing a mask because it was in the summer of 2020, and they believed in masks, so whenever I came to visit them, we were all wearing masks. So I walked into the room, and she said, she heard me, she goes, Jillian, try and listen with an open mind. And it was Trump at a rally. You couldn't even make this, like, you couldn't script this better. It was Trump at a rally at a hangar. It was some airport hangar, telling the housewives, I got you, you're safe. We're gonna keep you safe. And it was like, he was talking to my mom, the suburban women, that's what he was saying. And this is my daughter after Biden won in November. And I like to end on a positive note because through this really dark period, my mom's bestest friend, who's like a surrogate mother to me, and her, like a sister to her, we were really each other's support system. And it was really important for me to make a picture of them together. And this was actually right after, it was in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur where we spent the day together. So that's Bonnie and my mom. And this is April 2020. I turned 45. And it was at the height of just the worst for everyone. And it was also the worst our relationship had ever been. And we were really only communicating over text and fighting and waking up with a pit in my stomach with a text that came in at 2 a.m. And I turned 45, and who drives hours with a cake to stand outside the door to give it to me? And, that's my parents. So it's a complicated story of love and loyalty and all the things in between. So.
We have a microphone for questions, and I know we were going to have a conversation, but the Jillian has so much work that we wanted to kind of share with you.
Too much?
No, it was fantastic. But I think I'll just kick it off with a question or two, and then we'll kind of do Q&A meets conversation and squish the last parts together.
Okay.
I think when I was thinking about your family photographs, one of the things that people often ask Jillian about is presenting a family who is wealthy. And what does that mean in this moment with the resurgence of anti-Semitism and a lot of anxiety about how Jews are perceived and not wanting to play into those tropes, and certainly not wanting to put her parents into the firing line of that, and the complexity of showing Jewish wealth in this moment. When I was thinking about Stefan Zweig, who's a famous Viennese writer, biographer, and he had come from a very wealthy family in Vienna, and he had said at some point that when his parents and his mother was a very elegant woman, walked in the streets of Vienna, she was very careful to not seem wealthy, to kind of dress down because they didn't want to attract negative attention, play into stereotypes, but in their family portraits, that's where they could kind of dress up and show their wealth. And so there's this kind of self-censorship and a constant kind of coefficient of understanding how the world was seeing you as a Jew. And so traditionally Jewish family albums were how you could present yourself, how you really were and wanted to be without worrying about that kind of external perception and judgment and fear. And so one of the things that's so interesting is, you're making a private family album public. I mean, it's your artistic practice, but this is a family album. And this is what is the kind of inside voice of how you show yourself to your own. And then to make that public, what were the challenges of that, and what were you worried about showing and holding back?
So I was terrified. There's not a word to really express how scared I was and how are people gonna judge my family, and they didn't choose to be in public like this. Like, it's not fair. What's my responsibility? And I had many sleepless nights about it, and there were many times where I was like, no, I'm not doing this. I'm canceling this. It's just not worth it. And then I realized, actually, this is telling. I hoped, and I really felt it on good days, I was like, this is telling a larger story about family. Hopefully, the real things that matter, that every family deals with, will come through and transcend the surface of it all, because there's so much below the surface. And I hoped that it would, that people could read the nuance and the complication and connect to it. And thank God people did, and lots of different people connected to it and didn't see that. They saw their own family. So it was almost like there was something for everyone, but those fears did not stop. And I did feel worried about feeding into negative stereotypes of Jews, but then I also said, you know what? I have to be honest. This is my truth. What am I? Then I'm a hypocrite. Like, I'm an artist who tells stories, and so many other people are exposing themselves to me. I have to be honest and take responsibility and be truthful, or else I'm a hypocrite. And I was ready. I came to peace with myself, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready for it all. If somebody wants to, I feel settled with it. And I mean, I've had countless conversations with you. And I said, I believe in this, and what will be will be. And I can't control how people are going to respond to my work, but I have the responsibility to do it.
And what significance does it have to you to show this in a Jewish space, in the Jewish Museum?
I mean, it's such a Jewish, I don't want to only show it in Jewish spaces, of course, but it was really important. When CJM called me to present this work here, I was so excited. I was so interested, because I don't know many people in San Francisco, too, so I was really curious how the Jewish community in San Francisco and people in San Francisco would respond to it. So I think the Jewish conversation is such a huge part of this, and identity is such a huge part of this. The immigrant story, the American dream.
Well, and also testimony, as it's like a thread through all of your work, and also your parents and how their stories and their perceptions are coming out in the recordings and in the voices, messages, and also, of course, with the early body of work testimony and with Southern Rites, there's something about a kind of Jewish activism through testimony. The way we've been talking about this a bit, that the way that memory is constructed is largely through oral testimony, and we're in this like very critical moment when certainly Holocaust testimony has been through living testimony, and there's been all this anticipatory anxiety about what happens when the survivors are no longer with us to tell their stories. And this crucial way in which testimony has kind of created a shared collective memory and place of origin, and we are in this moment now where the survivors have disappeared. For 15, 20 years, academics have thought, what happens when there are no longer survivors left to tell these stories? And we've reconstructed our shared past through these oral living testimonies. And there's a sense that photographs will have to bear the weight for telling these stories in a different way when there are no longer living survivors. And I don't think it's an accident that anti-Semitism is coming back in full force at this moment where this living testimony is disappearing. And so we talk about visual activism, but I think testimony and people telling their stories is of Jewish value also, and we see how central it's been to telling our own stories.
Yeah.
How has testimony been incorporated into your work from the beginning? Like, how do you see that as part of your visual activism?
It's funny, I never, the word visual activism is something new, but it really resonates for me in what I'm trying to do, especially in the work in the South. I always was inspired. I went to ICP, where the ethos is like the concerned photographer, using photographs to, tell a larger story, to educate, to not just record.
Cornel Capa, who was the founder of ICP and the brother of Robert Capa, the famous photographer of the Spanish Civil War, said concerned photographers are photographers who don't just document the world but try to change it and take a stand in their work. And certainly Jillian carries on that narrative of concerned photography.
Yeah, I mean, that's the work that always spoke to me. That's the work that, the way I approach my work. It's really important. And I'm not a fly on the wall, right? I'm interacting. There's no objectiveness. There isn't. So anyway, I really do think of the work in a sense as visual activism.
I know we could talk forever, but I really want to make sure everyone has a chance for questions. Does anyone have a question? I see one in the back.
Yeah, good afternoon. I don't know if this is on. Thank you very much for the presentation. Actually, this was a wonderful conversation. And I thank the CJM and the Federation for bringing this. My question to you is, could you please explain to us, as a Caucasian, Jewish, female American, how do you get into a community like the West Bank, meeting and introducing yourself to Palestinians and getting them to feel comfortable with you so that you can not only photograph them but also take their stories? And then also, you're really a foreigner in Georgia. You're going into a community that's black, it's white, but it's not Jewish. How do you get into that community and get them comfortable such that you can photograph and take their stories?
So when I was working in the West Bank, I worked really closely with two men who never questioned, the question of Judaism didn't come up. I was American, I was there to tell stories that were important. And we became really close. And I remember I was there for one of my birthdays. They threw me a birthday party at home with their kids. And on the last day of working, Ahmad said to me, it's all propaganda. The Holocaust didn't exist. The Jews are just filling propaganda. And I was like, I just sunk in my seat. And I started like shaking. And I replayed the conversation in that day in my head over and over again, because I didn't have, I don't know, the confidence, or I didn't know how to deal with it. I was half scared, half disappointed, horrified, but I couldn't have that conversation. Like, I wish I did. Like, it kills me that I didn't have that conversation, that I didn't say, well, I'm a Jew and that's my history. I didn't. I was scared. So my Judaism didn't come up, and I was mostly scared when I was in the West Bank of the IDF, really, because the clashes were happening. It was like when I was there, I was essentially on the Palestinian side, because if anything had happened, the IDF would have, not protected me. So, and ironically, I was more scared. I had more fear in Georgia than I did in Gaza and the West Bank. And I had to question myself, I'm a white Jew from New York. What is my business going there and messing with this town? Like, I think you have to question yourself all the time. What is my place? What am I doing? What responsibility do I have to the people whose stories I'm telling? So, two things. First of all, a lot of the white people would only open up to me. If I were black, they wouldn't have talked to me. So it was almost like they looked at me like, oh, we could talk to you, you're one of us. So it was a really strange thing, but it is what it is. Like, that's how they felt. That's how they felt comfortable. And there were a lot of people in the black community who I talked to and became very close with, but they did not want to be filmed or photographed because their livelihoods and their safety was at risk. And I had the most respect for that. I do not. So I knew then, I know my place, and I want to make this better, not worse.
Well, and I'll add to that your question about Georgia, that Jillian is kind of carrying on this incredible tradition that most of the iconic photographs documenting the civil rights movement in the American South were taken by Jews. Think of Leonard Freed, Danny Lyon, Bruce Davidson, Jill Friedman, Bob Shapiro, Edelman. I mean, if you think of the iconic images of the civil rights movement in the American South, odds are you're thinking of photographs taken by Jews. I don't think that's an accident. I think there is something about being white presenting and white passing, but also an outsider, that allows you to navigate these white racist spaces, but also as an outsider. And certainly, Jillian was kind of taken into confidence in these white spaces where a black photographer would not have been given access, but yet she was an outsider. And I do think that that is an important piece. I think actually there's a great exhibition to be told about Jewish photographers in the civil rights movement in the American South. And I see her work as inheriting that. And for many of those photographers, also like Richard Avedon, who did this incredible series on Baldwin, Richard Avedon and Baldwin went to high school together. And he said, well, we were both outsiders. Well, Baldwin was a gay black man, and Avedon, when you look at him, what about him as an outsider? But he was Jewish. And so there's an encoded kind of recognition of that. And so for most of those photographers, and I've interviewed several of them or their spouses or descendants, they were not religious or observant. And for many of them, like Avedon, the only Jewish thing Avedon ever did every year was he went to a Passover Seder. Same thing with, I think, Danny Lyon and other photographers. And what is the Passover Seder? It's about freedom, it's slavery, liberation. And then you have these photographers who are going and taking the iconic images of the struggle for civil rights and liberation in the American South. So when you talk about Jillian being kind of Caucasian Jewish in the American South, it's part of this incredible tradition. And I would love to see that, more of that story told, which I think could really be healing in this moment. I think we're all living in, and I probably more than most, because I didn't even know who LeBron James was. I'm living in a bubble, it's like a kind of echo chamber. The only people I know who voted for Trump are Jillian's parents. Like, that's how far away it is. And so I think that so often, if you're watching MSNBC and your whole family is like liberal, Jewish, coastal, you're living in this bubble where you're not confronted with other views. And I was thinking about our talk today, and I looked up the statistic about the Jewish voting. More Jews are voting Republican than ever before. And it was 24% of American Jews voted for Trump in 2016. 30% voted for Trump in 2020. It might be an uncomfortable fact for some of us, but it's a fact. And this is where the country is going. You might not have seen or experienced that firsthand, but that's where it's going. It used to be that 80% of American Jews voted Democrat and 15% voted, I looked at the statistics, Republican. It shifted to like 68-30. It's like 68-30 or 68-28. And so I think it's really important that Jillian's work expands our notion of what is really happening in this country. When we started talking about Southern rights, and I would say, oh, I'm working on a show about racial segregation in the American South, and these white problems and these black problems, and people would say, when? Thinking we were talking about Jim Crow. And I would say, now, like while Obama is president. And it was shocking that this is happening in our own country. And so I think that Jillian leading from a place of empathy and genuine desire to tell people's stories is so crucial at this moment where we're living in a world where we're often not confronted with the reality of how complicated this world is when we live in our own kind of echo chamber. And it's crucial that we're confronted with those stories. So her parents, it's not an outlier. This is a trend, and it's something, especially as an American Jewish community, that it's important to talk about and see.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting when people go through the show, when it first came out, I'm like, I'm so curious how people are going to respond. And it's crazy that so many people are experiencing this with their families, and it's not an anomaly. And it is something that needs to, it's not fun, it's uncomfortable, but it is something that needs to be talked about more.
But part of the thing with Jillian is that she's so empathetic and she's so feelingful that, what was happening with her parents, it wasn't like, oh, I disagree with them or it's crazy and fucked up, but it was more a deep pain at her parents and their views. And I was thinking about that Camus quote, I love justice and I love my mother, but if I have to choose, I choose my mother. And like, what do you do with that tension between your worldviews and these people who love and accept you and have nurtured and supported you, and how you navigated that tension?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've come through it?
I think that this helped a lot. I'm definitely not looking forward to the next election. I've had a little bit of a grace period. But no, this has helped me a lot. And actually, my parents reading the book, they didn't read the book until it was bound, because I didn't want their creative notes at all. And but what I did do, just to make sure that it felt like I was doing right by them, their best friend Bonnie, she went over all the drafts, and I said, do I get your green light? Because I know she only has their well-being in mind. So I presented them with the book, and they read it, and there was lots of tears, there was lots of laughter, but they were like, you told your truth. And we had the most open conversation that we've ever had that night at dinner. There was a lot of vodka involved, but it did, it's helped us. It really has, and for the first time, they saw me and they respected me. I mean, they thought I was completely out of my mind too, which I acted in ways that I'm not proud of either. No, but we're all, they have their point of view of how I acted, and I had to really take that in as well. And that's a relationship. I mean, it's very easy to cut someone out. It's really, really easy. I know a lot of people who cut family and members out and friends, and that almost seems easier. But these are the people I love most in the world. That was never an option for me.
Well, and going back to the earlier bodies of work, you see Harley, and you hear her quotes about like this racist tradition that she thinks is so important to maintain, and you judge it, but then you hear her parents talking about, and you see these inherited narratives. And I think that is also, we didn't show the picture of your wedding, you're in your wedding dress, but there was also your own story of how much of your family's traditions and narratives you are recapitulating, and how much you're pushing away from it to create a very different story than your sister and your parents. And there is that.
I guess I am also very attracted to and who I photograph, like the people who are the brave ones who, are coming out against, their conformed community where there's pressure to be the same. And I'm interested in outliers, and I like to celebrate outliers.